Breaking news. First hearing of Dr. RIEK Machar's politically motivated trial set for September 22nd. Juba, September 18th, 2025. The first hearing in the politically motivated trial of South Sudan's first vice president, Dr. RIEK Machar Teni Durgan, and 7 other senior political detainees has been tentatively scheduled for Monday, September 22nd, 2025, according to credible legal sources in Juba. The prosecution is expected to present what critics have already dismissed as concocted and politically driven charges before a special judicial panel. The case has attracted intense scrutiny both inside and outside the country, with many describing it as a deliberate attempt to silence dissent and dismantle the fragile political balance established under the 2018 revitalized peace agreement. Mounting criticism. Opposition groups, particularly the Sudan People's Liberation Movement in Opposition, SPLMIO, have strongly condemned the trial, calling it a political witch hunt engineered by President Salva Kiir's camp. Civil society organizations and human rights activists warn that the trial risks plunging the country back into instability at a time when peace remains fragile. International observers, including diplomats from the African Union, AU, the Intergovernmental Authority on Development, IGAD, and Western embassies in Juba, have also voiced concern. Several have cautioned that the prosecution of a sitting first vice president under questionable circumstances could jeopardize South Sudan's credibility and international standing. Defense team mobilizing. Dr. Machar's defense team, which includes prominent regional and international lawyers, has vowed to challenge the legality of the charges. They argue that the case lacks both evidence and constitutional grounding. "We shall overcome it," finally, a source close to the defense team remarked, stressing that the proceedings will expose the trial as a politically motivated scheme rather than a genuine pursuit of justice. The defense has further announced that updates will be provided to the public should any changes occur regarding the scheduled date. Supporters stand firm. Despite the mounting pressure, Machar's supporters remain defiant. Across several towns and refugee settlements, SPLMIO loyalists have reaffirmed their unwavering commitment to their leader. Many fear, however, that the trial could heighten political tensions and deepen mistrust between South Sudan's rival factions. A nation on edge. The September 22nd hearing is set against a backdrop of growing political uncertainty. The government's move to suspend Machar earlier this month and press charges of treason, murder, crimes against humanity, and financing terrorism has been widely condemned as a breach of the peace deal that brought him back into government. Analysts warn that the trial's outcome will have far-reaching implications, not only for Machar and the SPLMIO, but for South Sudan's fragile peace process and its relations with international partners. The first hearing in the politically motivated trial of South Sudan's first vice president, Dr. RIEK Machar Teni Durgan, and 7 other senior political detainees has been tentatively scheduled for Monday, September 22nd, 2025, according to credible legal sources in Juba. The prosecution is expected to present what critics have already dismissed as concocted and politically driven charges before a special judicial panel. The case has attracted intense scrutiny both inside and outside the country, with many describing it as a deliberate attempt to silence dissent and dismantle the fragile political balance established under the 2018 revitalized peace agreement. 107 judges expected in Juba. In what observers call an unprecedented development, 107 judges from different countries are expected to arrive in Juba between Friday and Sunday to take part in the proceedings. According to sources close to the judiciary, the judges are being drawn from across IGAD member states, the African Union, AU, and select international partners, including Kenya, Uganda, Ethiopia, Sudan, and Somalia, IGAD region, Nigeria, South Africa, Tanzania, Rwanda, and Egypt. AU member states, United Kingdom, United States, Germany, and the Netherlands, international observers. Organizers of the defense argue that the extraordinary involvement of such a wide pool of jurists underscores both the sensitivity of the case and the level of international scrutiny surrounding it. Mounting criticism. Opposition groups, particularly the Sudan People's Liberation Movement in Opposition, SPLMIO, have strongly condemned the trial, calling it a political witch hunt engineered by President Salva Kiir's camp. Civil society organizations and human rights activists warn that the trial risks plunging the country back into instability at a time when peace remains fragile. International observers, including diplomats from the African Union, AU, the Intergovernmental Authority on Development, IGAD, and Western embassies in Juba, have also voiced concern. Several have cautioned that the prosecution of a sitting first vice president under questionable circumstances could jeopardize South Sudan's credibility and international standing. Defense team mobilizing. Dr. Machar's defense team, which includes prominent regional and international lawyers, has vowed to challenge the legality of the charges. They argue that the case lacks both evidence and constitutional grounding. "We shall overcome it," finally, a source close to the defense team remarked, stressing that the proceedings will expose the trial as a politically motivated scheme rather than a genuine pursuit of justice. The defense has further announced that updates will be provided to the public should any changes occur regarding the scheduled date. Supporters stand firm. Despite the mounting pressure, Machar's supporters remain defiant. Across several towns and refugee settlements, SPLMIO loyalists have reaffirmed their unwavering commitment to their leader. Many fear, however, that the trial could heighten political tensions and deepen mistrust between South Sudan's rival factions. A nation on edge. The September 22 hearing is set against a backdrop of growing political uncertainty. The government's move to suspend Machar earlier this month and press charges of treason, murder, crimes against humanity, and financing terrorism has been widely condemned as a breach of the peace deal that brought him back into government. Investigative report. SSBDF and UPDF accused of chemical gas bombing in Nasir County, Upper Nile State, Maker County after some government security personnel had a Facebook chat with Honorable Reith Muok Tang by disclosing his location to be in Maker County. Nasir disturbing reports from Upper Nile State allege that forces from the South Sudan People's Defense Forces, SSBDF, operating in coordination with the Uganda People's Defense Forces, UPDF, carried out a chemical gas bombing attack in Jimir Payam and Maker Payam of Nasir County on Thursday. According to local eyewitnesses and community leaders, the assault involved aerial bombardment followed by the release of toxic chemical agents, which spread rapidly across the affected areas. Survivors reported symptoms consistent with chemical poisoning, including severe respiratory distress, eye and skin irritation, dizziness, and sudden unconsciousness. Civilian impact. Initial accounts indicate that dozens of civilians, including women and children, were exposed to the chemical agents. Many have reportedly fled to nearby villages and across the border into Ethiopia in search of safety. Medical personnel in the region, already strained by shortages of medicine and equipment, are struggling to treat the influx of affected civilians. What we witnessed in Jimir is not a normal attack. People collapsed instantly after inhaling the gas. Children are coughing blood, and many families have fled without food or shelter, one eyewitness told local reporters via satellite phone. Community elders described the attack as a deliberate atrocity intended to terrorize the local population and weaken SPLM/AJO strongholds in the area. Humanitarian alarm. Human rights activists and aid groups have sounded the alarm, warning of a potential war crime and a gross violation of international law. The use of chemical weapons is strictly prohibited under the Chemical Weapons Convention, CWC, to which both South Sudan and Uganda are signatories. If confirmed, this would represent one of the gravest violations of humanitarian law in South Sudan's recent history, said a representative of a regional rights organization. International humanitarian agencies fear a looming humanitarian catastrophe, as displaced families urgently require medical treatment, clean water, and emergency shelter. Government and military silence. As of Thursday evening, neither the SSBDF nor the UPDF had issued a statement in response to the allegations. South Sudanese government officials in Juba have remained silent, while Ugandan authorities have not commented on claims of their forces' involvement. Investigative report. Machar's trusted bodyguard dies in prison after 6 months of torture. Juba, September 18, 2025. Tensions in South Sudan have escalated further after reports confirmed the death of CDE. Gathik, one of the most loyal and trusted bodyguards of First Vice President Dr. RIEK Machar Teni Durgan, who died in prison after enduring 6 months of brutal torture. According to sources close to the SBLM/AIO, Gathic was arrested earlier this year as part of a wider crackdown on Machar's inner circle. He was held incommunicado, denied medical care, and subjected to repeated beatings and inhumane treatment that ultimately led to his death earlier this week. A loyal soldier silenced. CDE. Gathic had served in Machar's personal protection unit for years, earning respect within SBLMIO ranks as a disciplined and committed officer. His colleagues described him as a man of integrity who remained unwaveringly loyal even under duress. He endured the worst forms of torture but never betrayed his oath. He died a hero, but his death exposes the cruelty of this regime, a senior SBLMIO commander told reporters. Torture in detention. Human rights monitors say Gathic's death is not an isolated incident. Accounts from opposition members and former detainees point to a pattern of systematic abuse in South Sudan's detention facilities, where political prisoners are allegedly subjected to starvation, electric shocks, and prolonged solitary confinement. International observers warn that such practices constitute grave breaches of human rights and may amount to crimes against humanity under international law. Silence from authorities. So far, the government has remained silent on the incident. Officials from the SSBDF and the National Security Service, NSS, have not commented on Gathic's detention or the circumstances of his death. The lack of transparency has fueled public anger, particularly among Machar's supporters, who accuse the state of pursuing a deliberate strategy of intimidation. Political timing. The bodyguard's death comes just days before Dr. Machar's politically charged trial, set to begin on September 22, 2025. Opposition leaders say the killing is part of a calculated campaign to weaken Machar psychologically and dismantle the SBLMIO ahead of the court proceedings. The government wants to instill fear, but instead it has exposed its brutality. This will only strengthen our resolve, said a spokesperson for the SBLMIO. Calls for international action. Civil society groups and human rights defenders are demanding an independent investigation into the circumstances of Gathic's death. Some are calling on the United Nations, African Union, and IGAD to intervene and hold the perpetrators accountable. Legal experts argue that South Sudan risks further isolation if such abuses continue unchecked, particularly as the international community closely monitors Machar's trial. Investigative report. Political repression and violence escalate in South Sudan. Chemical attacks and deaths in detention. Juba/Nasir, September 18, 2025. South Sudan is facing a worsening political and security crisis as reports emerge of both chemical attacks in Upper Nile State and the death of a key opposition bodyguard in Juba. These incidents highlight growing fears of human rights abuses and escalating violence amid the upcoming trial of First Vice President Dr. RIEK Machar Teni Durgan. Chemical gas attack in Nasir County. Residents of Jimir Payam and Maker Payam in Nasir County, Upper Nile State, reported a chemical gas bombing attack carried out by forces of the South Sudan People's Defense Forces, SSBDF, reportedly with the support of the Uganda People's Defense Forces, UPDF. Eyewitnesses described civilians suffering from respiratory distress, skin irritation, dizziness, and sudden unconsciousness after the assault. Many families fled the area to nearby villages and across the border into Ethiopia. What we witnessed is beyond conventional warfare. People collapsed instantly after inhaling the gas. Children are coughing blood, and many families have fled without food or shelter, an eyewitness said via satellite phone. Humanitarian organizations warned that the incident could spark a major humanitarian crisis, as hundreds of displaced families urgently need medical treatment, clean water, and shelter. The attack is viewed as a deliberate effort to intimidate SBLM/AIO strongholds ahead of Machar's trial. Death of Captain Luka Gathic Nguyen in Juba. Simultaneously, Captain Luka Gathic Nguyen, one of Machar's most trusted bodyguards, died in military detention in Juba on Thursday morning. Nguyen, a native of Mayam County, was arrested in March 2025, shortly after Machar was placed under house arrest and had been held at the Jameis Military Detention Center. The government body that arrested him must ensure a transparent and thorough investigation is carried out. Why he died in detention and why he couldn't get medical treatment, a family member said. Family members said Nguyen had fallen ill in detention but had no access to medical care. The body remains at the military hospital mortuary in Giada, and the family has not been allowed to see it or confirm whether torture contributed to his death. SPLMIO officials suggested that Nguyen may have been tortured to pressure him or other bodyguards to surrender or denounce their leader. Around 80 members of Machar's security detail are reportedly still in detention. Human rights advocate Edmund Yakani condemned the killing, calling for accountability and justice. Any unlawful act that leads to the loss of human life is disturbing. The country has lost many lives due to political disagreements, he said. Context: political tensions and human rights concerns. Both incidents occur against the backdrop of Machar's suspension by President Salva Kiir and referral to court on charges of treason and crimes against humanity, linked to a March militia attack on a military base in Nasir County. Other prominent figures, including Petroleum Minister Pute Kongchul and General Gabriel Duplam, were arrested in March. South Sudan's constitution requires that detainees be brought before a judge within 24 hours, but this legal safeguard is often ignored, highlighting systemic violations of due process and human rights. Analysts warn that the chemical attack in Nasir and the death of Nguyen in Juba represent a dangerous escalation in political repression, potentially destabilizing South Sudan further as the September 22 trial approaches. International implications. If verified, these developments may draw sharp condemnation from the United Nations, African Union, EU, and Intergovernmental Authority on Development, IGAD. Human rights experts stress that the use of chemical agents and the unlawful detention and possible torture of political figures could amount to war crimes and crimes against humanity, attracting both regional and international scrutiny. The international community must intervene to prevent further abuse and ensure accountability, a human rights observer said. Political repression and violence escalate in South Sudan amid Machar's upcoming trial. South Sudan is facing a serious political and security crisis, with reports of chemical attacks in Upper Nile State, the death of a key opposition bodyguard in Juba, and a formal rejection by the SPLMIO of charges against its chairman, First Vice President Dr. RIEK Machar Teni Durgan. These incidents highlight mounting human rights abuses and political tensions as Machar's trial approaches. Chemical gas attack in Nasir County. Residents of Jimir Payam and Maker Payam in Nasir County, Upper Nile State, reported that forces of the South Sudan People's Defense Forces, SSPDF, reportedly with Uganda People's Defense Forces, UPDF, support, carried out a chemical gas bombing attack. Eyewitnesses described civilians suffering from respiratory distress, skin irritation, dizziness, and sudden unconsciousness. Hundreds of families reportedly fled to nearby villages and across the border into Ethiopia. What we witnessed is beyond conventional warfare. People collapsed instantly after inhaling the gas. Children are coughing blood, and many families have fled without food or shelter, one resident said via satellite phone. Humanitarian organizations warned of a looming crisis, as displaced families urgently need medical treatment, clean water, and emergency shelter. Analysts say the attack appears aimed at intimidating SPLMIO strongholds ahead of Machar's trial. Death of Captain Luka Gathik Nguyen in Juba. Meanwhile in Juba, Captain Luka Gathik Nguyen, a trusted bodyguard of Machar, died in military detention on Thursday morning. Nguyen, a native of Mayam County, was arrested in March 2025 shortly after Machar was placed under house arrest. He had been held at the Jameis Military Detention Center, reportedly falling ill but receiving no medical care. Family members said the body remains at the military hospital mortuary in Giada, and they have not been allowed to view it. SPLMIO officials suggested that Nguyen may have been tortured to pressure him or other bodyguards to surrender or denounce Machar. Around 80 members of Machar's security detail reportedly remain in detention. The government body that arrested him must ensure a transparent investigation into why he died in detention and why he could not get medical treatment, a family member said. Human rights advocate Edmund Yakani condemned the death, calling for accountability. Any unlawful act that leads to the loss of human life is disturbing. The country has lost many lives due to political disagreements, Yakani said. SPLMIO rejects charges against Machar. Adding to the political crisis, Pal Mai Deng, SPLMIO spokesman and former irrigation minister, formally rejected the charges of murder, treason, and other crimes brought against Machar. The charges stem from the March 2025 White Army attack on a government garrison in Nasir, which killed General Major Dak and several soldiers. Deng described the charges as illegal, fabricated, and politically motivated, violating both South Sudanese law and the 2018 revitalized peace agreement, to which the SPLMIO and the government are signatories. As procedures of trial as well as charges against the first Vice President Dr. RIEK Machar, Chairman and Commander-in-Chief of the SPLM/AIO, are illegal, fabricated, and politically motivated, we entirely reject the SPLMIG's arraignment of him, Deng said. We call on the African Union, IGAD, EU, Troika, UN, and others to join us in rejecting the ongoing illegal and unfair trial of the first Vice President. Machar has remained under house arrest since March, and the trial date has yet to be officially announced. SPLMIO officials warned that the trial could further destabilize the country if conducted under the current political climate. Political and humanitarian implications. The chemical attack in Nasir and the death of Nguyen in Juba illustrate a pattern of escalating repression against opposition figures and communities in Machar strongholds. Legal experts warn these incidents may amount to grave human rights violations and potential war crimes. Analysts caution that without international oversight, South Sudan risks deepening instability, undermining the peace agreement, and facing heightened scrutiny from the UN, EU, IGAD, and international partners. These coordinated acts of intimidation, unlawful detention, and violence against civilians and political actors mark a dangerous escalation that threatens South Sudan's fragile peace and security, a regional analyst said. Fear rises among civilians amid reports of inhumanity and injustice in Juba. Juba, South Sudan. Fear is mounting among South Sudanese civilians as reports emerge of widespread inhumanity and injustice unfolding in the capital. Human rights advocates and local sources say mass detentions, arbitrary arrests, and deaths in custody are on the rise, deepening public anxiety in a country already on edge. Families of detainees have spoken of loved ones being held without charge in overcrowded facilities, with some reportedly subjected to torture and inhumane treatment. Civil society organizations warn that conditions in Juba's detention centers have become dire, with inadequate food, lack of medical care, and what some describe as insane levels of death in jail. The crackdown comes in the wake of the government's decision to charge opposition leader RIEK Machar with treason and other grave crimes. A move critics say has sparked a wider campaign of political repression targeting perceived opponents and sympathizers of the SPLMIO. Fears of renewed civil war in South Sudan as SPLMIO calls for regime change. Juba, South Sudan. Fears that South Sudan, the world's youngest nation, could plunge into a new civil war are intensifying after the main opposition party, the Sudan People's Liberation Movement in Opposition, SPLMIO, openly called for regime change. The call comes amid mounting political turmoil following the indictment of suspended Vice President RIEK Machar, who is currently under house arrest in Juba. Machar has been charged with murder, treason, and crimes against humanity, allegations his party has dismissed as fabricated, illegal, and politically motivated. In a strongly worded statement, SPLMIO said the charges were nothing more than a political witch hunt designed to dismantle the fragile 2018 revitalized peace agreement that ended South Sudan's devastating 5-year civil war. Meanwhile, reports confirm that Uganda has deployed additional troops to the capital, Juba, in support of President Salva Kiir's government. Analysts say the move underscores fears within the ruling elite of escalating unrest and possible armed confrontation. The crisis coincides with a damning new United Nations report, which accuses senior South Sudanese officials of embezzling billions of dollars in oil revenues, while millions of ordinary citizens remain deprived of basic services such as healthcare, education, and clean water. Fear among civilians. Tension in the capital has been compounded by growing reports of widespread inhumanity and injustice. Human rights advocates and local sources allege that mass detentions, arbitrary arrests, and unexplained deaths in custody are becoming increasingly common. Families of detainees say loved ones are being held without charge in overcrowded facilities, where conditions are dire and medical care is scarce. Several watchdog groups describe the situation as insane levels of death in jail, warning that the campaign of repression appears aimed at silencing opposition voices and instilling fear among civilians. The crackdown comes in the wake of Machar's indictment, with critics suggesting the government is using the moment to tighten its grip on power and target anyone perceived to be sympathetic to the SPLMIO. Background: South Sudan achieved independence from Sudan in 2011 after decades of armed struggle led by the Sudan People's Liberation Movement, SPLM, under current President Salva Kiir Mayardit. But just 2 years later, in 2013, a power struggle between Kiir and then Vice President RIEK Machar ignited a brutal civil war. Kiir accused Machar of plotting a coup, sparking fighting largely along ethnic lines between the Dinka and Nuer communities. The conflict left an estimated 400,000 people dead and forced more than 2.5 million people, over a fifth of the country's population, to flee their homes. As part of the 2018 peace agreement, Machar was reinstated as first vice president in a unity government with Kiir, a power-sharing arrangement intended to lead the country toward democratic elections. Why tensions are rising again? The uneasy partnership between Kiir and Machar has always been fragile. Though they appeared together at Kiir's swearing-in ceremony in 2020, their relationship has been marred by mistrust, competing political ambitions, and disagreements over the pace of security and constitutional reforms. Analysts warn that Machar's prosecution, combined with the current crackdown on civilians, could collapse the peace deal entirely, undoing years of painstaking negotiations. The SPLMIO's latest call for regime change has heightened concerns of renewed violence, with ordinary citizens once again caught between rival political elites.